Hello everyone. Welcome to What's New for Branding in SharePoint 2013. Hopefully you all are hearing me well. If there are any issues, please ask a question or something like that in the little GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar question thing, and I'll try to look over there every once in a while and make sure that I try to get to your questions. But hopefully everyone is here and ready to go, so I am going to get started. So here's a little background information on myself for those who don't know me. My name is Randy Drisgill. I am an MVP for SharePoint Server. I'm also the SharePoint Branding and Design Lead at Rackspace Hosting, and I used to be with SharePoint 911, of course. We got acquired by Rackspace not too long ago. So I guess our team name is officially Rackspace Professional Services for SharePoint now, but I do pretty much the same type of work that I did at SharePoint 911. So I've also worked on a couple of books. Some of you may have read my 2010 SharePoint branding book. There'll most likely be a SharePoint 2013 branding book coming probably later this year sometime, once I actually write it. And you can see I've also got a 2010 2007 branding book as well, and a real-world SharePoint 2010 book. If you want to check out my blog, it's at blog.drisgill.com. You can check me out on Twitter as well. And I'm down here in Orlando, Florida, in all the heat. So what we're going to talk about today is mainly what's changed for the branding story in SharePoint 2013. I think in a lot of ways, the story is a little bit more interesting than when we went from 2007 to 2010. They added some features that I think are going to help out with the branding story. And also, Microsoft's done a lot to make the default UI feel a lot more modern and a lot more usable. It's a lot more standards-based as well. You don't really see someone is saying that they can't hear anything. It says that it's muted by an organizer. I think that my audio is working if other people don't hear me. Okay, some people say it's fine. Okay, great. We will continue then. Thank you everyone for telling me that it's going fine. And so essentially I think with this version of SharePoint, Microsoft has decided that in a lot of ways they were very successful at creating a product that a lot of companies want to use in the intranet. And with this version, I think one of their goals was to make it a lot easier for people to customize the UI, and as well as make custom development that works with SharePoint. So if you attended the developer session that Jonathan did earlier today, I think you may have learned a little bit about the new app model, and that's a good example of one of the ways that they're sort of making it easier to customize the SharePoint experience. And then from a UI perspective, you'll see in this session that they've done a lot of things to make it so that traditional designers can hopefully approach SharePoint branding a lot easier than before. There's still a lot of gotchas and things for people to know before they can really make really high-end branding, but it should be a lot more approachable now in this version. So let's take a look at some of this. Here is the UI for 2013, a team site. Most of you have probably seen this in some way, form, or fashion, but if you're familiar with how the UI looks in Windows 8 and Windows Phone and all those type of things, you'll probably recognize some aspects of this UI. They've kind of gone with the big font for the title, and you'll see in the team site specifically there's some tiles in there that you can click on and interact with. But in a lot of ways the UI is a lot more sparse than it was in previous versions, and I think that's probably a good thing for a lot of companies because they want their own branding to sort of shine through, and even if they don't brand SharePoint, they don't want it to look like they're using using something else. And so they did a lot to remove things that distract from just working with SharePoint. And so you'll even see, if I go into a demo later, you'll see that there's a button in the top right that will sort of what they call take the screen full screen, but really what that means is it kind of hides the navigation and some other things. So if you wanted to just work with the content directly on the page, you can kind of do that as well. There's also a lot of other nice little features like drag and drop and things like that for document libraries, things that kind of make things more usable. So when we talk about how we brand SharePoint, and when we talked about this in SharePoint 2010, this was sort of the slide that I used to show for the approaches to branding in 2010. So I had like a low effort, which was just using out-of-the-box master pages and UI with a theme. We had a medium effort, which was mainly working with custom CSS, adding background images, alternate CSS, that kind of thing. And then we had the full effort, which was, you know, working with master pages and page layouts, CSS, all that kind of thing. So that was kind of like you want to make Ferrari.com or something like that. You had to go the full effort. So I think in 2013, a lot of ways, they're kind of squishing the medium level down. And so they've increased a lot of the things you can do in the low effort. And you'll see some of them as I go through the slides here. Like compose looks and the design manager and things like that will make it easier for people to do low effort branding. And then there'll still be the medium effort where you could do alternate CSS or something like that. But I think that the full effort will almost be a little bit harder because now there's some more things to worry about behind the scenes as you're branding SharePoint. And also it might be a little bit harder because if you weren't doing SharePoint branding in 2010, and you didn't have an understanding of all the things that go on behind the scenes, it might be more difficult for you to make the transition to the full effort because the low effort will do a lot of things for you. And you'll see that in a little bit when I get to the slides. So you might have some more things to learn. It sort of just dumps you off, and now you're like, okay, now how do I go from the easy to hard? And so I think that gap will be a little bit larger to jump right there. So that's kind of how I think it's going to change in the new version. So let me see. I've got a couple of questions here. Let me just see if anyone's got anything. Yeah, I'm going to cover some of that stuff. So let's just go through this. So let's talk about some of the new features in SharePoint 2013 for designers. So I think one of the first big differences is no longer is SharePoint Designer the key way that, you know, a UI person will do SharePoint branding. You can still use that if you'd like. The option is still there for you. But you're able to use pretty much any tool you would like to work with the branding aspects of SharePoint. And so the way they've made that work is that you can map a drive on your computer to the master page gallery. And so you could just go in there and you can edit anything you'd like using any tool you would like. So if you want to use Dreamweaver, you can use Dreamweaver. If you want to use Expression Web, you can do that. If you want to use Notepad, you can do that even. And so I use, I never really used the design view in SharePoint Designer, so I pretty much am using Notepad++ for my editing because I just like, I like just being able to make quick changes and then just hitting refresh in the browser. And so now I don't have to use SharePoint Designer anymore. I can just go in, map a drive, go find a master page, open it up, and just start editing in it, and hit save, and then see the results in my browser window. But if you prefer to have a design view, you're going to want to use something like Dreamweaver or Expression Web because for those of you that haven't seen yet, in SharePoint Designer 2013, they've actually removed the design view. So this tool is still out there for you to use, SharePoint Designer. You can still edit master pages, page layouts, all that kind of thing. A lot of ways it behaves the same way as it used to. But the design view is not there. And so if you're used to using that, you'll want to switch to a tool that has some sort of design view in it so that you can work with it that way. So that's one big difference. You can use any tool you'd like, just map the drive and start editing things. The other probably huge difference, I think, is that there's something called the Design Manager. And if you have a SharePoint server site and you have publishing activated, so you've either created a publishing site or you have a regular site and you activate the publishing feature, you'll have something called the Design Manager in there. And so the idea with the Design Manager, again, was to make it so that people that understand how to do HTML design, CSS design, can approach SharePoint a lot easier. And so it's got a lot of features in there to facilitate that process. You can see here over on the right side of the screen is the menu of things that you can do in there. And so We'll go through some of them in the slides here. Some of them we might skip for later. But in a lot of ways, the Design Manager is the hub for all things branding in SharePoint 2013. There's a few exceptions that we'll talk about in a little bit that aren't, for whatever reason, didn't get tucked up under that menu, but most of them are in there. And so you could tell that design was a big feature in this version because if you go over to the Site Settings menu, Site Actions menu, and hit the drop-down, it's actually one of the top-level choices before you even get to the Site Settings thing. And so they carved out a little portion of the Site Settings just for the Design Manager. So with the Design Manager, what you can do now is you can work with master pages and page layouts in HTML. And so if you were to go into the Design Manager and you have an option of either creating a new master page or converting an existing one. So if you go in there and you create a new minimal master page using the Design Manager, what you actually get is two files. You're going to get an HTML file and a master page file, and the two will be tied together. And I'll show you in a little bit when we get into some demos that when you open up the HTML file, it's fairly traditional HTML, except for it'll have these really large comment blocks in it that SharePoint knows how to use. And so you'll see those, and that'll be where like the SharePoint functionality comes in. But the reason why they're commented out is you could open it up in Dreamweaver or something like that, and it wouldn't like get caught up and hung up on SharePoint controls that aren't necessarily part of HTML. And so the more complex controls inside of that comment actually include like a screenshot or an HTML version of that control so that Dreamweaver or Expression Web can show you sort of a representation of what that thing would look like in the design view there. And so that's one way you can work with it. You get this HTML and master page experience. So then if you have a map drive to the folder and you open up the HTML file and you start editing it, every time you hit save, it's going to update the master page that's associated with that HTML file. So if I add hello world to the HTML file, SharePoint will see that I've updated that file, and it'll redo the master page real quick, and it'll add hello world to it. So they're tied together like that. So if you wanted to, you could sort of start it that way, and then if you want to then just work with the master page, you could break off the master page away from the HTML file and just work with that. Or you can kind of continue on and just totally edit it just in HTML and see the updates. Page layouts are very similar. You could say create new page layout, and it actually has an HTML file and an ASPX file that are tied together. And so when you edit the HTML file, the page layout that's associated with it also updates. And when you create that page layout, it actually adds in the field controls that are already in the content type that you've picked when you say create the page layout. So that's one way you can work with these things. The other thing you can do that's really interesting, and I think a lot of people will at least experiment with, is they have this concept of converting an existing HTML design into a master page. And so what you can actually do is if you wanted to go out to like a template site, download a design that's already functioning in HTML or have you, or if you've already created your company branding as an HTML project and you've got it looking the way you want it to in HTML and fully tested it and that kind of thing, what you could do is you could upload the entire folder with images, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, all that kind of stuff up into the master page gallery. And then what you can do is you could go in there and tell Design Manager, I want to convert that HTML file into a master page. And it does some voodoo behind the scenes and some magic. And what you end up with is something that's like, and I'll try to show this in a little bit, is you end up with something that looks like your design, right? So it comes up on the page, it renders, and it looks like what you started out with. But what it's really doing is it's taking the page content and just putting it below that. And so then what you're going to have to do then is go in and edit the HTML and move around like the content block so that it's in the middle of the page, and then add various other things. And so one of the things that would have been kind of tricky for people to work with this stuff is they would have to know what all those controls are. And so that's something that they also gave us in the Design Manager. And so I'll show that in a second. But here's a quick screenshot of the Dreamweaver experience. You'll notice in the public preview, at least on my machine, if you look in the design view there, you can see that it's a little bit funky. It looks kind of like the default experience, but there are some images that have CSS sprites in them that are kind of messed up in there. I don't know. Hopefully that gets fixed before the release version. But at least in my Dreamweaver, that's how it looks. But you kind of have an okay experience there if you're used to working with the design view in SharePoint Designer, and you can click on the areas and it'll highlight the areas of the page. But if you look over on the left, you'll see there's the code of the HTML file there, and you can see that there's all these comments in there that start with, at least all the ones on this screen start with SPM. And those are, if you're familiar with how branding worked in traditional SharePoint branding work, those are all of your controls that would normally be inside of a master page. And so now they're commented out so that Dreamweaver won't get confused when they show them. But when you look at the code view, you still kind of have to look at them. And sometimes they're compressed into one line so that you don't have to look at multiple lines. But in some ways, it can be almost more confusing if you're used to the traditional way of branding, because now you have to look at all these comments and things like that and try to figure out, okay, which things do I care about? But hopefully for people that are new to it, maybe it'll be easier to get used to. One person asked in the questions, Art asked, if this works better in Expression Web. I've tried it earlier on. I haven't tried it recently. It was sort of a similar experience. So from that respect, I don't know if it's that much better. Might be slightly different than how this is. I'll try that again later, and if I find anything interesting, I'll try to do a blog post about it. But I haven't done a lot of work with Expression Web. Robert Laundry says that Expression Web is the same, so there you go. Sounds like it's about the same. Here's what I use. I use Notepad++ to do a lot of my editing, and I like it because it's just a clean interface. I can do code coloring and that kind of thing, and I can see. I can just kind of work with the code in like just a regular editor. I think you could also use Visual Studio if that's what you like. Visual Studio might be nice because it probably has some robust code completion and things like that. So you have a lot of options now. You can kind of decide on what editing environment you think works best for you as you're working with this stuff. And again, if you just want to work with SharePoint Designer, you can still do that, but you don't have the design view. So I mentioned before that if you're doing all this stuff in HTML, how are you going to know how to put navigation, breadcrumbs, all that kind of stuff in there? So they thought about that, and they have something called the snippet gallery. So when you create a minimal master page with using the Design Manager, or if you convert an existing one, you can click on it, and then you can get into a snippet gallery. And what they've done here is they've done, I don't know, about 20 controls or something like that that they felt were the most common ones. And it includes navigation, breadcrumbs, search box, title, logo, sign-in, web parts, etc. And when you click on them, it'll give you that little commented snippet that I showed you in the previous screen. And so what you could do there is you could say, okay, I've got my brand started. Now I want to put, search box in there. So you click on the search box. It'll give you the snippet. You copy it out of there and paste it into Dreamweaver, Notepad, Expression Web, whatever you want to do. Hit save, and then SharePoint will redo the master page, add that thing back in, and then you'll actually have the functioning control in there in your master page. Here's a quick screenshot of what it looks like. You can see that at the top is all of your options that I mentioned there, all of the controls that you can use. There's some of them that are related to page layouts and some of them that are related to master pages. Like if you click on media and content, you have web parts and things like that that you can put in that probably make more sense in a page layout than in a master page. And there's also a custom ASP.NET markup button. If you click that, if you had some .NET control or something that you wanted to have in your page, you're going to need, and you're going to work, and if you want to work with the HTML, then you've got to sort of convert it into this funky comment thing. So that's sort of how you do it, is you'd hit the custom ASP.NET markup thing, and then there'll be a box. You paste your control in there, and it'll turn it into one of these comments for you. And you can see underneath of the top bar, there's a preview, so it shows you kind of what that control is going to look like. Below that is the HTML snippet. That's where all of the HTML and the comments and even the preview go. That's what you're going to copy and paste out. And then over on the right-hand side is where a lot of the options for that control are. And what they've tried to do here is you'll see in this screenshot they're all minimized. Like if I clicked on advanced, that would expand out. they tried to only bubble up what they thought were the most important ones. And so I don't know if they completely nailed that, because sometimes the important ones aren't bubbled up and you'd have to expand it out. But what you could do there is you could expand it out, and that's how you could change some settings for the control, and then hit update, and it's going to update the snippet, and you can copy and paste that back into your page. So that's sort of how that basic process works. I mentioned this already, that you can import things, but so the other thing you could do is once you've finished your design, so let's say you've got all that stuff looking like you want it to. In previous versions, what you had to do if you wanted to get your design onto another server, like let's say you were working on a dev box or a local VM, something like that, or if you have a 365 site that's up in the cloud and you wanted to get it to that, back in the old versions you had to go into Visual Studio, you had to copy in all your assets, create a solution package, upload that to the server, have somebody with STS-ADM access apply that to the server, etc. In 2013, they have this idea of you can actually create a design package straight from the design manager. And it's as simple as just clicking a button. And what it does is it goes out and it grabs all the assets that are in your design. And there's sort of some gotchas here in that it kind of grabs maybe more than you would expect, in that it grabs everything. It'll grab like the default master pages, default page layouts, all the CSS images, but it also gets some lists and things like that that you might not have expected, and it creates a sandbox solution out of it. And so you can then take that solution, upload it to a 2013 server, and then you can just hit the import button, and you can import it into your site. And then what it does is it adds all those assets to your site and applies it automatically. So I think this is good for simple branding scenarios. If you have something more advanced where, let's say you have custom controls you've built, or just anything really involved, a really involved website, you're probably going to want to still roll your own in Visual Studio, I think, because you could have a lot more control over the process if you do it in Visual Studio. Like you can say, I only want these things to come over from my dev box to my production box. And you can also do some things like a feature receiver or something like that, and say when people apply the solution, it's going to not only apply the branding to this site, but it's going to push it to all the subsites. Or you could say when I create a new subsite, it's going to automatically take on the branding. Those are things that the export and import process in the design manager wouldn't really handle. It's more of just a simple apply it to your site, see the design, kind of quick and dirty kind of way of getting design around. But it does sort of make things easier for people that are new for this, so that they don't have to worry about doing some of that if they don't want to. So that was sort of the basics of how you're going to work with the branding and create a site or what have you. But there's also some other concepts that you can use that's in 2013 that really make branding nicely. And so this is one that I'm actually pretty excited about, because in 2010 mobile sites were kind of tricky. Like if you wanted to have a different master page for an iPhone versus an Android device, or an iPad versus a laptop, there was a lot of work that you had to do on your end to do something like that in 2010. So in 2013, they've added this concept of device channels. And the way device channels works is you create a substring. So let's say you wanted to target an iPhone, right? And so what you need to do is you need to look at what the browser ID is for that device. So like when you browse to something, the browser sends an ID, so you can Bing or Google that ID and get it out. And so in an iOS device, it might be like Safari, iOS, something like that might be in there. And you pick a part of that string, so it's a keyword, any part of that string, put it in the device channel, and then you can start targeting things to devices that have that keyword in their browser agent. And so what you could do here is you could create a device channel for, say, an iPad. And then when you go to the master page settings screen to apply a master page to your site, you have an option that says, I want to apply one master page to everything, and then a different master page only for these iOS devices. And so that'll allow you to sort of take, and if you wanted to, make a master page that's just targeted to a small screen and have another one that's targeted to a big screen. You can also do that with page layouts as well. You can say show this page layout or that page layout. But the other cool thing you could do is once you've created the device channel, you get an alias for it, right? So it's got like an ID. So if I called it like iPad, then I can use that ID in my master pages, and I can put parts of the master page into a panel that will only show for that device channel, which is kind of cool. So then you can have just one master page if you want to, and say, okay, quick launch is never going to show on an iPad, so you could just like hide it for just an iPad. Or you could say, you know, I'm only going to put this footer on there if it's this device, this Android device. So you could say parts of the page, you know, show or hide or do different things based on this device channel, which is pretty neat. And so this is a little bit different than the CSS3 idea of media queries, which if you look at that, media queries in CSS3 allow you to change the way the page looks based on attributes of the browser. So you could say, like, if the screen resolution is higher than 1024, I want to do this. And if it's lower than 320, I want it to rearrange and do this. So that's targeted to behaviors of the browser, like screen resolution, things like this. This is targeted to the actual browser ID. And so you could take both of these ideas and put them together and use them to sort of make a very responsive website if you wanted to. You could make it so that the CSS is targeted to screen resolution, but then on these devices you can hone in the interface to even be more controlled. Another great idea in 2013 is composed looks. If you're familiar with how themes worked in 2010, I like to think of this as sort of an extension of that idea. I don't know if Microsoft thinks about it that way or not, but in a lot of ways it's very similar to themes, but it looks a lot nicer. It feels almost like a WordPress type of thing. The big difference between composed looks and themes is a couple things. One, composed looks, they include colors and fonts just like themes did, but they also include a background image, so you can have an image that shows up behind the screen. You can use it in different ways. It also is tied to a master page, and so you could say, essentially you're saying like this theme is tied to, you know, this master page, and this other theme is tied to a different master page. And so that way you can more tightly control the experience, because in 2010 when you had themes, you could give someone a theme and then they could apply it to either V4 or night and day and it would look entirely different. In this case, you could hand somebody a composed look and it would be tied to this very specific master page. The other big difference with composed looks is that unlike themes in 2010, you don't create them with the Office client. Instead, what you're doing is you're basically just making XML files that contain all of the color and font choices that are available in the composed look. And there's not really a tool that will help you put together those. Essentially, for right now, you just copy one of the existing ones and then change the colors and fonts to match how you'd want it to look. The other big thing that composed looks have is something called a preview file. And that's kind of a really strange concept. Let me show you. Here's a screenshot of some of the composed looks that you can pick from here. And so when you go into the UI and you say, I want to pick a composed look, what you're seeing right here is actually that preview file. And so you have this file. It's kind of like a pared down, simple HTML and CSS file that looks like your master page but isn't a .master file. It's sort of a confusing concept. And so again, if you want to create one of these, there's not a tool that helps you create that preview file. So you're going to want to copy one of the existing ones and kind of learn from that. To be honest, I think that whole process is a little bit kludgy and difficult, and so I think it's going to take some folks in the community kind of helping out to make that process a little bit easier. But if you want to make a composed look, you're going to want to also make a preview file that goes with it. So you'll want to take a look at that process if you're going to be working with composed looks. Another big concept in 2013 is a navigation change. In 2013, there are two types of navigation. We have the navigation that we're used to in 2010, which is now called structured navigation. And then we have a new type of navigation called managed navigation, and it's based on the managed metadata term sets. And so when by default, it uses that managed navigation, and you can see that there's some interesting benefits to using the managed navigation. First of all, you get friendly URLs as part of it, and so you could say, like, when I create a page in 2010, you see like the pages / whatever if you're in a publishing site. If you're in a team site, you see site pages and the name of the page. In 2013, when you're using this, it creates sort of a friendly URL, so you could just have like randyswaffles.com / bagels, and that'll go to the bagel page. And it's sort of behind the scenes, the term store just knows to map that URL to where the page actually lives. The other interesting thing you get with this is what I'm calling a fancy quick edit button. I don't know if it has an official name or not, but you'll see in the UI that if you have permissions to work with the site, you'll get this edit links button throughout the site. And so you don't have to necessarily go to site settings, navigation to make changes. You can just be on the page, hit the edit links button, and start changing the name of the link or changing where the link goes, et cetera, which is actually pretty handy. But from a branding and UI perspective, it gives you something to think about, because when people hit the edit button, you get sort of what you see at the bottom of my screen here, which is where it tacks on some things into the UI right into the navigation. So if you're having very highly stylized navigation, with background images and fancy colors and stuff, when you hit that edit button, it might look really weird. And so you'll have to do some specific editing, some specific CSS for when it's in edit mode. So that's something to consider if you get into branding of the managed navigation. So if you're used to how it worked before and you want to bring your site forward from 2010 and you don't want to mess with any of this new stuff, you could flip it back and just use structured navigation. But you miss out on a lot of the benefits that come with the new navigation if you do that. But that option is there for you. So here's a quick example of what happens when you take a look at the navigation part in the term store management tool. So when you create navigation in 2013, you can see in my term store on the left, there's this area that says site navigation. That's where all my navigation items are going to appear. And I've clicked on one of the items here, homepage, and you can see here over on the right, there's some attributes that we can work with and change. And so we can change the title of it. We can change the hover text. We can say whether it's visible or not. There's a lot of different options here. And if you see at the top there are some tabs that we can click through and even do more stuff. And so that's where the friendly URLs comes in and that kind of thing. So you get a lot of power here to make navigation. And so if you wanted to add some new items, you just click on site navigation and add new term. When you add a term, then it's just going to appear in the navigation. If you want to create sort of a sub item, you could just go to one of the top level items and say create term under this one, and that would create a sub item. So that's sort of how you would build out your navigation. Another big thing, and this is something that if you were on Thursday's call with John Ross, he talked a lot about some of this stuff. And these are what I'm calling WCM features, because they're really part of only in publishing. They're only in a WCM site. But you get the ability to do some interesting things. For one, there is a web part called Content by Search that you have available to you. And it's similar to how the Content Query web part works. Content Query web part is still out there, by the way. You can still use that if you'd like. But the Content by Search sort of builds on that and is a little bit more robust. For one, it is based on the SharePoint 2013 search engine, which is a nice, even more advanced search engine than it was in 2010. And so you're basically just querying using that engine, so it's very performant, very speedy, etc. The other interesting thing about the Content by Search is that if you're used to how the Content Query web part works, there's still sort of this idea of the item style and the group style, the main style, those kind of things. But instead of using XSLT to style them, you use something called a display template. And the display template works kind of like when we were talking about master pages and page layouts. You have an HTML file that you edit, and you can add JavaScript and these little tokens to it, and when you hit save, it sort of creates this display template, and so every time you hit save, it re-updates it. And this is how most of the search experience is styled, and also how this content by search is styled. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword, because no one really understood XSLT very well, and so they've moved it forward to this HTML and JavaScript idea that a lot of people understand. But the downside is there's not a lot of examples out there like there is with XSLT. So if you want to do something fancy, like string replacing and things like that, you're going to have to figure it out based on, community and Microsoft documentation as to how the display templates work, versus just looking at a generic XSL example and then applying it to SharePoint. So that's something to keep in mind if you're working with this. The other thing you get in WCM that's really interesting is this idea of catalogs. John, I think, talked a lot about this in his session, so I'm not really going to get into it too much, but if you have something like a large list of products or something else that's sort of repeatable like a product, where they're all sort of arranged the same way, they just have different attributes to them, you can use a catalog for it. And the benefit of using a catalog is that you get some pages that you can edit in one place, and they apply to every single one of the products in that catalog. So for instance, if we had a product catalog filled up with breakfast items, pancakes, waffles, etc., and we had it all wired up using this feature, and people came to like the waffle page and saw it, and then they went to the the pancake page and saw that, we could change the way all those pages look just by editing one template. And so there's a category template and a detail template. So you can sort of edit the experience that shows all the products, or you could edit the experience that shows the product details, and it have image, product name, description, all that kind of stuff in there. Pretty fancy little idea. It's interesting to think about how this will change some public sites and things like that. So if you have sort of like a BestBuy.com type of thing, you have like hundreds of thousands of products, this might be a great way for you to do a site like that, because in 2010 you'd have to go in and create an individual page for each one of those maybe and publish it, etc. You could have page layouts that you could edit, but it's a little bit more cumbersome to work with a large group of products in 2010. So that's a pretty interesting feature. So if you've got products, you can use that. So if you're an old school brander like myself, old and crusty with gray hairs in your beard, etc., how does the story change for you if you don't like some of these new ideas? Well, in a lot of ways, you could still do things the way you're used to. You could still just go in, you could even use SharePoint Designer to do this. Go in, create a master page, just start editing it to your heart's content, not have to worry about the HTML stuff. Same thing with page layouts, etc. But much like when we went from 2007 to 2010, the master page is different. There's probably a lot more gotchas in there, things to think about. I won't get into that in this session because this is pretty much an intro session, but you could imagine that in a future book or in future sessions I'll talk about how you would work with this stuff by hand if you want to. Another thing to consider is that CSS has gotten even larger. So if you're familiar with core v4.css in 2010, it had about like 7,000 lines of code. Core v15 has about 12,000 lines of code in it, so you have more to worry about. Again, there's no comments in there to help you, so you're going to want to use tools like Firebug and IE Developer Toolbar to help you look for these things. And you can still use your content query web parts for roll-ups and things like that. But I think one key thing to think about, though, that's nice is that while things have changed, they're even more cross-browser friendly than they were before. The ribbon is still there, etc., but they've redone the way it works a little bit so that now it works normal in Chrome and things like that. I've browsed it from my iPad, and scrolling pretty much works like I'd expect it to, things like that. When you put web parts on the page and web part zones, there aren't tables in there anymore for those types of things. Now they're divs. So it's a little bit cleaner experience now. Again, because it's changed, if you're just going to bring forward a design from 2010 to 2013, you have some work to do. These things aren't styled exactly the same way they were before. So that's something that you'll have to worry about. But it is a cleaner UI experience. So we have, I don't know, probably 15 minutes or so left. What I wanted to do was maybe show some of these things in my VM. Again, I won't go too deep into a lot of this stuff, but let's just take a look at some of it. And if folks have questions, then I'll try to answer some before the end of this as well. But here's the basic UI of a publishing site. Kind of sparse, but I kind of like it. If I put the page in edit mode real quick, you'll be able to see that the ribbon is still there. I don't know if you'll be able to see it over the GoToWebinar, but it kind of has some nice animations and things like that in it. I don't think they're showing up on the GoToWebinar right now, but when you switch from different areas, sometimes you'll see it fade out and in, and it's kind of nice. But in a lot of ways, it works a lot like it did before, but the icons are a little bit more metro, things like that. Another thing to get used to, site actions on the right again, for those of us who came from 2007 days. That's really fun. I've already started getting used to the site actions being right here. So now when I go back to 2010, like my muscle memory just pulls me over to here when I need to be over here on the left. So that's always a fun thing to get used to. The other funny thing that some folks have pointed out is that it's a little gear, and so is this little gear up here in IE 9. So if you have users that get easily confused, you'll want to train them as to which gear to go through. I think one of them has like less cogs on it maybe than the other one, and a different color, etc. But know that the site actions is right here, and you'll see, like I said, in the site actions is this design manager link here. And so if I click on that, it'll take us over to the design manager. If we didn't want to go to it that way, we could also just go regular site settings, and then it's right here at the top of look and feel. And so when we go into the design manager, you can see here's a lot of those options I talked about. Here's where the device channels is. Here's how you upload your files, et cetera, et cetera. But when you go to this upload your design files thing, it shows you here's like a URL to your master page gallery. And so all you really have to do if you want to add files to it is you can go to like my computer over here. You can right click and you can say add new network location, and then paste that into here, and then it creates something sort of like what I have right here. And so you can just click on this, and you're getting like a view of your site collection, much like you had in SharePoint Designer. And so if you remember where master pages are, catalogs, master page, here's where all the master pages and page layouts are in 2013. The interesting thing, if you're used to 2010, we used to put a lot of stuff in the style library. You can still do that, but now since you can edit things a little bit easier in this master page gallery, Microsoft is actually recommending that you just put your styles in here if you don't need them to be themable or anything like that. If you need them to be themable, I think they still have to go out into the style library, even though you'll see there's a themable folder here. I don't think that's wired up, at least in the public preview. I don't think it's wired up. And so what I've been doing is, because things can get a little bit confusing, I actually make subdirectories, and I just put everything in there. So I have all my styles, my master page, my page layouts, all sitting in there. But what I wanted to show you here is that I have a design already created in HTML, and some of you may recognize it from SharePoint Conference in Anaheim. If I click on Syrup Demo HTML here, and let's see if this comes up. I don't know what it's doing right now. Well, anyways, there's the regular HTML version of this design, right? And that's just sitting here on my desktop in this folder. And so I've got all my images and all my assets, just regular old HTML. There's no master page stuff or anything like that in here. So if I view source on it, you'll see it's got regular old HTML stuff, nothing fancy. What I can do is I can take this whole folder and I can drag it into my master page gallery. So if I minimize this real quick, here's that Syrup demo folder I was talking about. If I drag that into the master page gallery, it's going to think for a couple seconds. It's uploading 70 items. If your server's in the cloud, this will take a little bit longer. I'm on the exact server that I'm doing this on, so it's a little bit faster for this demo here. But it still takes a little bit. but this is adding all of my HTML assets and things like that into the site. And so it should end up, okay, so now it's in the master page gallery, Syrup Demo. So what I can do now is I can go over to, back to my site here, the SharePoint site, and now if I go to Edit Master Pages, and you'll see that I can either create a minimal master page or I can convert an HTML file to a SharePoint master page. If I click that, I get this sort of strange asset picker view here, which is kind of weird in my opinion, but anyways, it works. And then you'll see it takes me to the master page gallery, so you're seeing those same folders that I had before. If I go to that Syrup Demo folder, you'll see that here is syrupdemo.html. If I click that, and it adds it to this URL location, and I click Insert, which is kind of a weird, I think it should just say OK right there, not Insert. What it's doing is, behind the scenes, it is doing that conversion process that I talked about. I don't know if you could notice over GoToMeeting, but I didn't hit refresh or anything in this page, and the list here updated with my Syrup demo file. It's another interesting feature in 2013 is that lists can update behind the scenes, and you don't have to do a page refresh to see the difference. And so you'll see here it says conversion successful, approval status draft. That means that it converted that to a master page for me. If that file that I was using, that HTML file, had some errors in it, or it wasn't, if the file wasn't XML compliant, like let's say it was missing a close XML tag, a close HTML tag, something like that, it had something very malformed in it, then this conversion process would fail. And it tries to give you a little bit of information as to why it fails, but it's usually not very helpful. So that's something to watch out for if you get that. Someone in the questions asks what the green splat thing is. I believe that is new. It's a pretty interesting little icon. I barely even noticed it before, but I guess that's the new thing. So now that we've got this converted, how do we work with it? You'll see that there's these little 3 dots over here, and that opens a task menu here. And so what I could do is I could click Open here. And what it does is it takes me into this, I call it like a preview window. I don't know if it has an official name, but I guess it's some kind of preview page or something. And what you're seeing here is, even though we haven't applied this master page to our site, we're seeing what this master page that it converted would look like. And it's got this stuff at the top that's to kind of tell us it's in preview mode, etc. But you can see that it looks pretty much exactly like my HTML file did. And so you're like, oh wow, my work's done here. I've got a master page that works for me, right? Well, not quite. What you've got is a master page that works with SharePoint, but it's got all of your page assets just sitting there in the master page. It's all this junk you see here scrolling and stuff. And then right down here, this yellow div, this is where the page content is going to show up. And so, like, if I were to apply this to the site right now, that's how my page would show up. So I'll show you that in a second. And so really at this point, it kind of has jump-started you. You still are going to need to know how things work in SharePoint behind the scenes, but you didn't have to know how to get a minimal master page and how to get it into SharePoint and get your styles in there and all that kind of stuff. It sort of has jump-started you and fast-forwarded you to the part where now you need to worry about moving controls around on the page. And so I mentioned that there's a snippet gallery. I think this is the only screen that can get you to the snippet gallery, which is kind of weird. So you bring up this preview, and then at the top, you'll see snippets is up here. When I click that, it takes me to, if it ever comes up, that snippet menu that I was telling you about. And so this is how you would add things to your site. So if you want to add a search box that was actually functional, you click search box, and then you get a little preview here, and you get this snippet. And then you could go in here, and you could say, maybe you want to change some of the aspects of it to, I don't know what asset you'd want to change or whatever. But let's say you wanted to, make it wrap or something. You could toggle this, and then this little snippet area would update. You copy this, and then you're going to paste it into your HTML page. And so I should probably show you that while I'm in here. So now that I've done that conversion, right? Here's the catalogs master page gallery. And you'll remember I created that folder called Syrup Demo, and I uploaded all of my assets, right? And you'll remember I uploaded something called syrupdemo.html. It was just raw HTML. You can see after I did this conversion, there's a .master file associated with it. And if I right-click on both, say Edit and Notepad++, if you look at the syrupdemo.html file, it doesn't look like that HTML file I showed you before. It's similar to it, but now it's got all this other junk in here as well. And this junk is what makes SharePoint work. And so this is where I think people will start to get, they'll need to understand how things work behind the scenes, because if you're brand new to this, this is going to be challenging for you. So obviously your next steps are going to be, you need to remove some of the page stuff and add in those snippets and things like that. And so every time you add in a snippet and it's saved, it's going to re-update this master page file that's associated with it. And so essentially every time I make a change, it's going to update to include something in the master page file. So then once you've got this master page kind of looking like you want it to, or at least to the point where you want to try it, what you can do is you can click these little dots right here, click this one, and then you can say publish a major version. You have to do that before you can apply it to your site. If you don't do this step, then it's not going to be available for you to apply it to your site. And so then you can go site settings, just like you did before, go into master page, and you can swap this over to Syrup Demo, and I can hit OK. And I'll think for a second, and then if I go over here to the top level of my site, you will see, with any luck, you'll see kind of what I was talking about. So I've got a functioning SharePoint site here, but here's my page content down here. So this is sort of where your job will start as a SharePoint brander, is now you'll want to move this into the main area of the page, etc. So that's kind of a high-level overview of how the Design Manager works. If you were looking in there, you could have also seen how the device channels works as well, because I made a device channel called Firefox here. And if I click on it, and let's see, how do I get to it? Oops. If I go, well, I forget how you do that, but if you go to new one, you'll see here, you give it a name, you give it an alias, and then you give it a rule. And so I have a rule that said Firefox in it. And so now what I can do with that rule is, once I've activated it, when I go over here to the master page gallery, you'll see there's an option here for Firefox. That's because I added that rule in there. And so I can say here, in this case, Firefox is going to get the default master page, but everyone else is going to get my Syrup Demo master page. And so all other browsers are going to look like this. If I go to it with Firefox and I hit refresh, it looks just like V15. And so that's how you're probably not going to do that exact example, doing something special for Firefox, but you could imagine that I could have an iPhone or something like that and say, the iPhone, I want this experience to show up. So that's going to be a pretty powerful feature going forward. So let me look through some of the questions and see if folks were asking anything. Let's see here. Do you ever need to edit the SharePoint mark? So Robert asks, after SharePoint injects all of that markup into your HTML file, do you ever need to edit that SharePoint markup? So that's an interesting question, right? If we look at that file here, let's see, get rid of this real quick. If we look at that file, maybe you would want to, right? So it added in all of these snippets, right? And so, like maybe an example would be, I don't know, maybe you want to add some JavaScript here. You want to get rid of something that it's bringing in for some reason. Like, let's say, for whatever reason, let's say you didn't want to have the robots meta tags in there, right? You could delete this from there and have it change. And so there might be some other examples of areas where you'd want to change some aspect of it. And then definitely when you're putting your own snippets in there, you'll probably want to change them, change some of their attributes, etc. As you're going in there. And so another thing you could also do is, every time I hit save here, my master page updates, what I could do is I could get it to a point where I kind of like it as a starting point for my master page, and then sort of decouple the two, and then just work with just the master page if I wanted to. That's perfectly acceptable thing to do. Then you don't have to look at all the comments and things like that if you want to. You can tab it out a little nicer so that you can read it and that kind of thing. So that's something that some folks may want to do as well. Let's see if there's any other. So we rely on people to know all the controls they need in a master page. Well, I mean they need to add all the snippets they think they need. So I think the question is asking, you know, with the snippet gallery, they're expecting people to know what all these things are, etc. And I think that's the case. I don't know if there's going to be a way for anyone to add snippets to this other than to say, click on this custom ASP.NET markup one, and then just add your own markup into there, you know, ASP whatever. But I think they've picked a lot of the high-level ones that people need to use. For the most part, a lot of them are there. So that's it's sort of helpful to have those snippets in there. Let me see some of the other questions that are in here real quick. Does the enterprise search site accept the master page, unlike SharePoint 2010 where you had to customize the master page? Another great question. From what I've seen, the search centers will pick up the master pages and use them normally, like any other page would. So you don't have to have a specific master page applied to just your search area. So that's going to save us all a lot of headaches. Now you may have some things you want to style differently in them just because of how search works, but you could apply this master page to the search area and it would behave normally. Like, so if I went, I don't think I have a search center in here to show you, but if I applied it to it, you'd be able to see my branding and that sort of thing. So that definitely saves us a lot of time. I think, you know, the one thing I want to get across to everyone, though, is that there are definitely some gotchas when it comes to the design manager and this HTML conversion process. I think it's very good for people that are new to SharePoint, and it's a great way to learn how to do stuff in SharePoint. I don't think you're going to be creating Ferrari.com using this method. You may start Ferrari.com using this method, but I don't think that you're just going to just be editing HTML and doing something like that. There are you know, some gotchas in there. You know, if you malform something, or if you have even some things like if you were to go get a template that is based on what is it called, boilerplate, the HTML5 boilerplate, they do some things in those templates that are valid HTML but are not valid strict XML. So the XML document is not quite valid according to what Microsoft is expecting. And if you try to convert one of those, it'll fail because of that. And so there are little gotchas with it. It is sort of frustrating having to deal with all those comments that are in there. The other thing to consider is that a master page created from this design manager, it only works with publishing sites. It's not set up to work with team sites and things like that, or a foundation site. So you could apply it to a team site, but there are some gotchas there. There's something called the minimal download strategy that gets in the way. So that's something where if you need a master page that's going to apply to a foundation site or team sites, you're probably going to want to not work with the design manager. You could start it with the design manager, but you're still going to have to understand how to do all the hard stuff. And so we're about out of time here. I think I'm butting up against the end of it. So I thank you all for coming out. Let me bring back my slide deck here so you can see my contact information and that kind of thing. If you want to learn more about my 2010 branding book, there's the link to it, 2013 branding book, after I write it. Blog is where I'm going to be putting stuff as I learn it. Twitter, I'll be talking about stuff as well. Email me if you have any questions. And hopefully everyone learns some great stuff from this. And if not, feel free to yell at me and tell me that I'm dumb. But thanks everyone for coming out. And hopefully I'll talk to you guys again later.